All right, well, thanks everyone. Wow, thanks for being here tonight. My name is Greg White. I'm a partner here at Sway Ventures. And tonight, we've got a great topic. We've got a great panel. And as you can see, it's the future of attraction, building a talent pipeline. First and foremost, we'll introduce Mark Hartley. And Mark Hartley is with Twilio, and he'll tell you about himself in a moment. And then secondly, Madan Ahuja. Thanks. Although I was corrected on the first name too. And Madan will tell you what's going on at Tote, a terrific company that we have an investment in. I've gotten to know these guys a little bit over the last 4 weeks as we've prepared for this, and the similarities in what they do is striking, but the differences in the business is also striking. But what's interesting about the topic tonight is just some of the things that affect you every day, and certainly the things that they're doing every day. Let me tell you a little bit about Sway Ventures first. So Sway is a U.S.-based venture capital firm. We have an office in La Jolla, California. We have an office here in San Francisco. It's a beautiful office you're sitting in today. And we have an office in London. You see some pictures of our portfolio leaders here on the wall. And what I tell you is that we're known kind of as a portfolio-friendly VC firm. We'd like to at least think that. But we try to live that. And so we look for companies that are trying to solve these very, very vexing and complex problems. And generally that's around markets and businesses that are incredibly inefficient. And those of you that have been at these events with us, you've heard this story before. And with that inefficiency, there's these wonderful technologies called artificial intelligence and machine learning and terrific advances in cybersecurity, virtual reality, augmented reality. Those are all themes and areas we really enjoy and look for firms and companies that are making strides in those areas. So that's how we play. So why do we do these events? I think some of you have been here before, and you know that being that friendly to the portfolio firm, what we think is always on their mind is capital, because they're always trying to raise money. Certainly revenue and how do they generate revenue, because it's what they think about every single day. And then probably third, and not necessarily in this order, is talent. And it's just such a big issue. So tonight we're thrilled to have a great panel and to have a topic like this. So let me tell you a little bit about these guys. So Madan at Tote runs recruiting there, and has also provided us that you can have access to later some really terrific tools around what Tote has done, around onboarding, even God forbid exiting, but also compensation and just processes. And so not only will you get some great insights from Madan tonight, but there's some tools that come with this if you'd like. So that's going to be available. We'll make sure you have access to that. Mark Hartley, wow, Mark, we've known Mark a long time. Mark's been a friend of Sway for many years, and he's been on this crazy ride from idea to IPO at Twilio. And those of you who know Twilio, we were an early investor in Twilio, and it was a tremendous exit as they went public, but they're on a rocket path as far as growth today. And Mark would tell you that the number of resumes he looks at and the work he does is pretty phenomenal. So in any event, what we'll do in the next few minutes is we'll cover a couple of key topics. I would say that the three key areas we'll talk about is, what are the biggest challenges that these guys have? And I think, like most companies, very similar problems. And then what are they doing about that? So the higher level topics will be this. And then finally, what's the future of this? And the things like, how do you create this recruiting culture in your company? How do you attract and retain? So this is, in the future, it will be quite interesting. So with that, I'd like to bring our panelists up, and come on up, guys. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe a little deeper dive on your backgrounds would be really helpful. And Madan, we'll start with you.
You need a mic? I think I got a pretty loud voice.
You do.
I know, I'm just kidding. My team and my company is tired of listening to my voice because I got the loudest voice in the room when it comes to hiring. That's the only way people take your offers. So I've, as Greg mentioned, thanks again for having us out here. Been in recruiting for probably going on to now 13 years. Started in New York, did that for about a year and a half. Bulk of it has been in California. Sweet spot has been small to mid-sized company. Started in tech recruiting. Now, of course, coming with Tote, do all of the above: tech, finance, accounting, marketing, design, pretty much everything under the sun. And in addition to recruiting, also oversee the HR function with the company. And been with Tote, blessed for close to a little over a year and a half now.
I've been in recruiting for over 20 years now, I guess. Seems like quite a long time. Most of it has been through executive search and high priority individual contributors. Many different companies over the years, consulting, advising, working with VCs, founders. 4 years ago, I started at Twilio when it was about 110 people. Today it's approaching 900. We're pretty much doubling every year. We went public last June, as you alluded to, which was a lot of fun, great experience. And now we are continuing to try to double our workforce every single year. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a challenge, and continue on doing it.
So when we were getting to know each other in the last four weeks or so, these guys have a lot to talk about, and so we tried to condense this down into things that we could that you could relate to, and certainly take some things away from. So the first topic really is, what are these biggest challenges? It sounds like a simple thing, but there's a lot to unpack here. The biggest challenges in your business as it relates to, I think, first and foremost, attraction, certainly on the retention side, and then what processes and such do both of you employ in your very different businesses to solve those kind of vexing problems? And maybe, Madan, maybe we start with you on that.
Yeah, where do I start from? I think Mark and I will probably agree on most of the challenges that we face, whether it's a small growing company or post-IPO. Some of the obvious ones are, of course, talent, right? Attraction, the whole aspect of from identifying to sourcing all the way to bringing them in the door before you take them through the whole process of recruiting is just, you're in California, specifically in the Bay Area. So we were reading some stats, and probably the lowest unemployment rate for technology professionals specifically. In addition to that, just talent in general, probably one of the lowest that you're going to run into here. So that's what you're competing with. You've got, we used to do this exercise back in my staffing agency days, where you'd enter a skill set and you'd say, let's say Ruby on Rails, and you say San Francisco as a skill set, and you say a 25 to 50 mile radius. Very recently we ran this, and there were about 500 plus companies that came up in that name. That's who you're competing with. So that is always going to be a challenge. No matter what kind of company you are, that's the pool of people that you're going to compete with. Say we pass that stage, everything moves on well. It's pretty much from there on, keeping them engaged, making sure you're their number one choice at every stage, because they're going to be interviewing whether you like it or not. They're going to tell you, maybe they don't tell you, but always assume that they've got other things going on, because it'll make you move faster. And once you get them through the stage, it's at the offer part, right? So pretty much, are they going to say yes? So that's where the anxiety kicks in, right? So you're not sure what's going to happen. There's a lot of going back and forth. You make the offer, then there's a 2 to 3 day window, a week, depending on companies have different processes in place. But at that stage, it's pretty much just kind of waiting to see whether they're going to accept or not. Last but not the least, now that they've not accepted, so what happens now? You're back to the drawing board. Easy. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, if it's engineering, it's really hard. But if it's non-engineering, it depends on the role. But bottom line is, it is something you got to be ready for. So we in recruiting used to always say, never be attached to anything, which means try and keep an even kill with your personality, and doesn't have to be a recruiter. I'm saying for all of you as entrepreneurs or hiring managers, you got to try and keep an even kill. Just, if someone says yes, great, move on. If someone says no, bad, move on. So develop that pipeline. So back to the drawing board, developing a pipeline. So those are the few things that keep me up at night, for sure.
For me, it's really about hiring in volume, but not just hiring in volume, but trying to hire top-tier talent in a very competitive marketplace. So what we had to do from an engineering perspective, or very early on, was to try to decide how can we get a larger talent pool. So we have our headquarters here in San Francisco. We opened a development center in Mountain View to tap into the talent pool in the South Bay. and we opened a couple other offices across the states. But trying to compete in this market, it all comes down to the candidate experience. If you can get them attracted and get them in the door, nothing is more important than their experience throughout the entire interview process. You have to communicate with them, sometimes over-communicate with them. You have to make sure that they are completely updated on the process, where they are in the process. Because if you let it slide, you don't talk to them, if they fall into what they think is a black hole, they sent their resume in, or they had a phone interview, or anything like that, and they get lost in the shuffle, you're not going to have a good experience. And then they do talk. It's a small valley, as a lot of you know. And I think the number one thing, without a doubt, is the candidate experience. And if you can make sure that they have a great experience, you have a great chance at getting them to sign their offer letter. But it is a competitive market, so you're going to get into things like, compensation is a big one, but it's not the only thing. I think probably the biggest thing for us, we have been able to create a culture that people want to work in. And I think if you were to walk through our building and ask anybody at random why they work at Twilio, I think they would probably tell you it's because the people they work with and the culture that we've created. So those are some things that I would probably...
One of the things you guys talked a lot about was, along this challenge was, and this applies for any of the innovators, portfolio firm leaders in the crowd tonight, is this getting consistency across the interviewers, as it were. And so, you have old school interviewers that have certain mentality on how they interview somebody, and then you've got folks that are a little bit different. What do you do at Twilio and Tote that's unique there that maybe would help the people here tonight?
To prepping all of the people, not only hiring managers, but everybody who's involved in the interview process. And that could be from somebody greeting them at the front door all the way through to the time they're at your offices. We create what we call interview kits. Every single person understands their role in the interview process, what questions they're supposed to ask, what they're supposed to focus on, because you don't want every single person asking them all the same questions. So putting in the time up front to create what we call interview kits, and explain to everybody in the process exactly what their role is, why they're there, what they're supposed to be asking. Put the time in up front, go through the interview process, and then we have a pretty robust, what we call a recap at the end of all the interviews to discuss the candidate and the qualifications. And then something that we started talking about recently, instead of saying, are they a culture fit, we call it a culture add. So do they add to our culture? What do they bring? Are they going to be a positive person in our company? Are they going to have a positive impact on our business? And so I think for us, it's really spending a lot of time in creating the interview kits for all of our hiring teams, and then also understanding the process of how we evaluate candidates, and then of course how we take them through the offer process.
Just to Mark's point, actually, pretty much with the whole rec kickoff process, so we've got a document set up in place. We have the hiring manager fill out the entire document. Then we set up a kickoff meeting with all the interviewers involved in there, so kind of very similar in process. That's the part where hiring manager drives the entire process. So they're the ones who are basically giving their vision of what the hire looks like, what should it be, what should we screen for. To your point, Greg, like sometimes you'll have folks with different generations that come into interview. So how do you reset expectations? Here comes in someone who's kind of used to a very certain way. You don't have a physical copy of a resume, well, that's a ding. You not sent me a thank you note, that's a ding. So how do you reset those expectations, And a lot of it falls onus on recruiting, right? Like, just to kind of reset that, kind of remind them about where the experience lies, where the market is, where the candidate, and what they've got, what are they competing with. So do the rec kickoff, get all the questions in place, feed it in our ATS, applicant tracking system, feed it in the applicant tracking system, and from there on, just stick with the process from step by step, right from the time they walk into the door all the way they walk out. Getting a full view, getting that experience, back to Mark's point, like taking them to the office, showing them around, gives them a very good view, like here's where you would sit ideally. So kind of giving them that visual sense. as a recruiter, we need to give them a heads up, like you're going to speak with these people, you're going to have these folks involved, this is their role, this is their title, here's what they're going to cover. So that makes a great experience for a candidate because they know well in advance when they're walking in the room what to expect and how they come fully prepared for that conversation. So it just, as you can control that entire process from step by step and have a robust recap as to in kind of thinking most importantly about your values, right? So a lot of times organizations forget to think about that in your interview process. So if your values are these 6 different points, who's covering this in an interview? Who's going to talk about that? Who's going to come in and speak specifically and see how the candidate responds to that specific aspect of the value? That's how we try to fit within, and hopefully that's where I like the culture add part. That's the whole part of basically trying to see how they would fit in the broader culture and how they would add more value. And idea is, did you learn something from someone in that interview process? Did you walk away knowing that something that you picked that you've not known before? So think about those things. Is this someone you're going to sit next to for the bulk of your life? We spend more time with our colleagues than we spend with our family in a lot of ways. So can you see yourself sitting with this person? And is this person going to add something to your knowledge? Not just you think about you taking, but what are you going to learn? What are you going to get out of it? So yeah, just keeping a very robust process and sticking to the plan. Things deviate, things happen, but try to bring it back on track.
I'm listening to both of you, and I'm thinking of experiences I've had where it just didn't go like that, and the way you've painted it is from a recruiting perspective, just spot on. I wonder, how then you work with the other staff members to make sure they have this same mentality, so they feel a buy-in to that candidate. And a couple of you mentioned to me before that in many cases, one individual in an interview process can shut down a candidate, or in some cases, it's the hiring manager that makes that ultimate call. Maybe talk about that at Twilio and maybe a little bit at Tote.
So we've instituted what we call a bar raiser program, and so we pick out a certain number of people. They go through interview training, and their job really is to figure out, does this person have what it takes to be successful at Twilio? If they don't believe they do, then they have ultimate veto power even over the hiring manager. Our culture and our values are incredibly important, not to just to our company, but also throughout the interview process. So we've instituted that. It's turned out to be incredibly valuable. And I think over time, more people will become bar raisers. But even more importantly than that is throughout the interview process, when you do have a candidate that you're not going to hire, they're just as important as the people you are going to hire. And how you express to them, how you decline them, how you tell them that you didn't get this job, but we are growing, there may be more opportunities for you. Every single experience is incredibly important because they do talk. Small town, small valley, and that experience is the most important thing. Something you spoke about a few minutes ago was talking about hiring managers taking over the recruiting process. Making hiring managers accountable is one of the biggest things you can do. They need to explain to their teams why this rec is open, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're looking for, and they need to drive it. If somebody misses an interview, doesn't show up for an interview, those are things that are need to be addressed because if you're going to be part of the interview process, you have to take it seriously, and you have to make sure that you're properly evaluating candidates, the ones you hire and the ones you don't hire.
Great point, Mark. I think so. What we also did was we took all departments by departments specifically and took them through a whole interviewing, recruiting 101 training. And you'll be surprised, I think a lot of questions we think is normal to ask or kind of evaluate candidates. One specific one was where someone was like, well, they've played individual sports, so I don't think they'll be a team player. I'm like, what about Kobe Bryant then? I'm sorry, nothing against the Lakers. But point being made that, there's a lot of unconscious bias which happens in interviews and you do not realize that. We're all human, sometimes there is a tendency of walking in like, oh my God, you went to the same school I did. Like, wow, I already have a favorable opinion of you. Or someone brought up a point about when someone refers a candidate over, I already have a favorable opinion. So it's almost a point of resetting all those expectations like, no, we cannot do that. You have to get into every conversation, treat every candidate based on their meritocracy, and that's it. And if you're ever confused, like, is this a question I should ask, not ask, think to yourself one question, which is that, will this question impact this person? This is the skill that they're being hired for? That's all that I should be focused on. So anything that's not related to the skill or they're hiring probably is not to be asked. So yeah, just doing the whole interview 101, taking it through department after department, understanding we have corporate values, then we got department values. Certain departments have certain things that are very specific to them. So who's grading candidates, who's kind of looking at folks from that angle. Last but not the least, 5 people say yes and 1 says no. What does that mean? So back to the whole debrief process, so which is where after the interview, everyone sits down. Just because someone says no does not mean the person's a bad candidate. We have to ask and dig deeper, like, why did you say no? Like, how is it 5 said yes, but you've said no, so what are we gonna do with that hire? Is it fair to nix the person because one person said no? Well, let's talk about it. Let's kind of have an open discussion. And hiring manager kind of has that veto, like, and talking and kind of talking through it and say, you know what, I think we should still make the hire, or maybe this makes sense that we need to move on. And yeah, last but not the least, close the loop with the candidate. Whether they get the job or not, hugely important. You got to treat, I like, definitely well said, you got to treat them with the same level of respect. And probe your managers to get feedback. This is one of the biggest parts, because it's easy to just say, no, they're not qualified, but well, what kind of feedback can I provide the person? Like, so it gives them an opportunity to learn. So they'll remember us, back to the experience, right? So, so those are the few things we try to focus on.
You know, one of the things you both have spoken about a lot is, from a leadership standpoint, how hard the CEO or senior leadership in the company has to drive this, and that has to be seen across the organization. As we look out in the group tonight, there's innovators, there's portfolio folks out here, there's people founding businesses. How does that founder have to be? I mean, and maybe talk about that a little bit. And I think the Twilio CEO story is really great, and then certainly maybe share that as well as Tote.
Our CEO, Jeff Lawson, you know, the whole thing about the culture and environment that you work in is incredibly important to him. We created 9 core values, and those are not things that you just put on your website or a bunch of lip service. These are things we talk about every single day. Something he talks about every single day, and it's how you also evaluate candidates. Do they possess the same values you have? Do they have the same leadership principles that we all talk about? And so it comes from the top down. And I would make a guess that if you talk to anybody at Twilio, you ask them why they work there, they say it's because they like the people they work with. It's a very unique place, and I think that starts with Jeff, and you know, he's done a spectacular job since day one of making sure that he has a place that people come to, that they enjoy, they're respected, they feel included, and like I said, that comes directly from the CEO, and it's something we discuss every single day.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. I think the CEO and president in Tote, Rakesh and Brett, they're like extremely involved through the entire process. They've empowered talent and HR to run with things, which means if your hiring manager has a role but they have not followed process, do not work on that role. So no matter you've lost let's say you've lost an employee, and the hiring manager is after the recruiter, like, come on, please, you know, have you worked on it? Have you started looking? They've literally said, if they have not followed process, if they've not filled the kickoff process, they've not met with everyone who are going to be part of the interview process, do not work on the rec. So that is huge. That involvement, that commitment from the leaders is extremely important. Yeah, and it makes our job a lot to police. It becomes a lot easier. Like, you know what? Ask him. He said no. I had nothing to do with me, but they basically have empowered us to kind of make those calls on their behalf. They're always available to every interview process. Certain interviews, they will be part of the process. Certain they won't. I can proudly say that I can walk up to any candidate at any point and be like, if you want us to talk to them, and that person could be at any level in the organization, they will both make themselves available, because that culture, being part of that entire, like making sure we're hiring those A players as we were talking about, is very, very important to them, and it trickles down from top management.
And you just hit a great topic is the kind of the A players and this attraction piece is so key. So, and I really like what you guys have done because not only you talk about the big challenges, you've already addressed a lot of the ways you solve them, but the one area I think people would really benefit from is as you think of what are your skills, tricks, methods for that attraction piece, and then how are you getting them in and closing? And there's got to be some very specific things. We talked about culture. We've talked about getting the team all aligned, making sure it's super professional when they come in and they feel wanted. But if you were to just give advice on how best to find that right candidate, what is that? What is that?
I think it has to do with asking them a lot of questions. Each candidate has at least one hot button. And if you don't understand what it is, there's no way you can address it and try to sell them on the opportunity. For some people, it's comp. Lots of sales folks, right? They're coin operated, which is fine. At least you know what they are, right? So you know what makes them tick. Some other people, it may be the type of project they work on. Some people, it may be work-life balance. There's a ton of different things that make a candidate want to go to work somewhere, and you have to try to figure it out. So it's really probing them, asking the right questions, finding out what's really important to them rather than just grilling them with a bunch of questions. Trying to understand them, trying to really listen to what they want, what they're looking for, because this is not about getting a job. It's about their career, and it's really important to them. And if you can let them know that you're invested in their career and what they want to do next, they will tell you what they want, and it can help you sell the opportunity. If you're just grinding out questions and just trying to fill out a form, just trying to pass it on to the next person, you're not going to be able to attract A players. You're not going to be able to attract the types of employees that you want to hire and retain. So I would probably say really thinking about what's important to the candidate and trying to evaluate their skill set along with what they really want to do in their next 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and give them a career path as well. Talk about all of those things. That will really help you identify A players and what they want to do, and also help you close them.
No, I definitely agree with Mark on a lot of things that you said about that. Initial screen is very important with candidates, very important. That sets the tone for their experience. So the whole experience that we're talking about starts with talent. When talent is talking to candidates on the phone, it is like beyond important to make that mark on that conversation. So listen to what they have to say. I always try to keep in mind, like, think about you versus I. So think about them, think about their career, think about why for them, think about empathy, right? So how would you like, if you're on the other end of the conversation, what would you have liked to listen about the company, the career, their how they fit within the org, all of the above. So that is like extremely important. If it's compensation, it's not a red flag. It's just something you want to keep in mind. Like, okay, if this person's leaving his or her previous role because of compensation, well, I just need to. I'm not sure, but let's see how the conversation progresses. So you got to listen to those buying signs because they'll tell you if this is more important to me. So again, keep asking. Ask them what is it about them, what is it they need, and how can you take that information and pass it to the interviewing team and bridge that gap. Basically, okay, so here's what he or she has basically said in their conversation. They're looking for this. First, can we give that? Second, if we can, bring it up in a conversation. Because candidates love, because they know you've listened. You've taken the time to understand what their nuances are, what their specific areas are. Think about the end in mind. So the idea is to hopefully have an offer, them starting and bringing and coming on board. That's the idea, right? So try to, I say always, I think all of us recruiters will say ABR, always be recruiting or always be closing in the sales world. So you want to keep that going. So keep them engaged, keep talking to them. They should almost feel like to a point when, wow, this person has given me so much attention. That's how much I'm going to be taken care of in a company like this. They care about employees. So just always keep on that experience as the number one thing in mind from a candidate point of view. So
the ABR I was gonna mention, but go ahead.
That same term. I think part of it is you have to use part of the interview process to evaluate a candidate. You have to use part of the interview process to sell the candidate. Because if you just use the first portion of it and you just ask them a bunch of questions, they are evaluating you as much as you're evaluating them, right? But they can't evaluate the opportunity unless you do your job and you answer all their questions, give them as much information as possible. And if you do that with a candidate, you can establish some credibility and trust, and it's going to be a place that they're going to want to work, right? And even if they don't get the job, you want them to walk out the door saying, you know, I didn't get the job, but that's a great company. I would love to work there. And that's really the goal.
I'll just add one last thing to Mark's point. So I think I think as a lot of people have a very old school way of saying that he or she did not send me a thank you note, right? This is a classic, you know, and you'll almost have people not hire someone. I've seen this happen through my career, right? So like, we'll not hire because, well, they didn't send me a thank you note. What you need to realize is you're in a very different economy right now. So it's back at the unemployment rate in the Bay Area. Why don't you send them a thank you note? When was the last time you messaged the candidate after an interview and be like, wow, what a great conversation? Now think about that experience. So each one of us out here have been a candidate and you get a thank you note from a hiring manager or someone in the team. Like, oh my God, Greg, what a great conversation. I'm so excited, looking forward to moving things forward with you. So not only after interview, but you also want to keep that communication, probe your hiring managers or team members to message the candidate even during that offer process. You know, so when there's a waiting period, 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, whatever the case may be, have them reach out to the candidate, have them drop a note, have the candidate, invite them for a happy hour, lunch, dinner, whatever the case may be. No pressure. We're not telling you have to, I mean, I'd love for you to take the offer, but we're not telling you to, we'd like that situation. But that said, we still want you to walk away with the best experience ever. So yeah.
This very meaningful question about, you know, what's the future of this and what tools do you see and so forth. And I'd like you maybe to talk a little bit what you each have done in your companies on incentivizing for referrals, these kinds of things, which is very, very popular today, and it's actually, there's money in it for employees. That's one thing. And then I'd like maybe the audience to start thinking about any questions you might have, because we do want to open this up for a few minutes to take your questions, so if you can start thinking about those. But maybe that one idea of referral, how do you compensate for that? Is that the best way to do that? And any other ideas about what the future of this effort holds?
So at Twilio, we're very fortunate. We get a tremendous amount of employee referrals. We do give them a referral bonus, but it's not a huge amount of money. I mean, it's worth it, obviously, because people do it. But I don't think that's the reason that they ultimately refer employees.
Money.
It's all right. But I think the thing they really want to do is they love working there. And so they want to refer their friends, their people they've worked with before. I mean, it's a huge number of employee referrals we get. And also, it's a big percentage of the people we actually hire. So employee referrals have been a tremendous source of candidates for us.
Yeah, no, same thing. So I mean, we of course do offer a referral bonus, and it's literally back to Mark's point. Like I've been in I've seen companies where they've offered up to $15,000 in a referral bonus, and there were no referrals. So it does not matter. Like, you know, you can offer anything you want. If people are not engaged, they're not happy, they don't look forward to come to work, they will not want to bring, I know misery loves company, but when it comes to offering people and referring people over, you don't want to bring someone into an environment that you're not happy in. So it's a lot of that, you know. So constant reminder, even from WDYK, who do you know, always. Just keep that in mind, which is when it's your employee, whether it's a person that you're interviewing. That's a hard one, though, actually, because if you're screening someone, you're like, well, who else do you know that can take this job? They probably won't give anyone. But point being, if someone is not accepting an offer, who do you know? If someone you hit up on one of the social media and they message saying they're not interested, who do you know? Your internal employees, constant communication, whether it's newsletter, new hire orientation, weekly reminders, very important, recognize them. So when they send you referrals, I'm not sure in big company like Twilio, like so many referrals, we had about 20% of our hires last year came from referrals. But recognizing them and having a forum, we do weekly stand-ups, so kind of calling them out, thanks for your referral. recognize the ones who even refer but don't get hired, because that feels great. Like my company at least values that I've taken the time. As a recruiter, we keep it a habit that even if the candidate is not qualified, we will talk to your referral. Because we'll tell them no, but at least we'll take the time to talk to them. So that just makes people want to refer even more over. But yeah, so.
For referrals, we also have a time limit on any employee referral. You have to get back to them within 24 hours. And if you are not going to move forward, you have to communicate with the person who referred them and tell them why. Because it's incredibly important. If they just feel like they refer a bunch of people and nothing ever happens, nobody ever hears anything, they're not going to continue to refer people. So, those are some of the things that I think help us attract more and more employee referrals.
Yeah, I mean, just terrific information. Now we're going to shift, I think, to some questions, but just anything else that strikes you as what the future holds here? We have a young firm in the audience tonight that's doing a lot of AI around recruitment, and so any thoughts on where that's going? Just for a few minutes.
I think those tools are great and they're useful, and anything that can make your job more efficient, especially when you're dealing with high volume, is fantastic. But at the end of the day, recruiting, talent acquisition, whatever you want to call it, it's a human business, and there's no substitute for picking up the phone and talking to somebody. I think we get stuck, sending emails, sending text messages, whatever it is. There is no substitute for picking up the phone and talking to somebody. So tools that can make evaluating resumes, applicants, potential applicants that you're going to source, doing that to make it more efficient, I think is fantastic. But there's no substitute for the human element when you're trying to hire somebody.
I can't agree more with you on that, Mark. Definitely, I think you cannot surpass the human element, because they're the ones who are the first voice that the candidate is going to listen to. So kind of investing in them, making sure they're passionate, they're excited, and they feel connected to the company will go a long way. So I mean, the tools are great. They make your life a lot easier. Obviously, as talent, we look at a lot of different factors. Investing in tools, whether it's going to make your life easier. Is it going to give you a pool access to talent that you've probably not seen before? What's it worth to you to do that? So those are the few things you want to keep in mind. But yes, the human element cannot go away. I'd say secondly, just again back to the whole thing of just thinking about the candidate experience. That's just going to get stronger and stronger. That's not going to go away. In fact, tables have turned. We remember 2008 when the economy tanked, and all of us, like you've been in recruiting, I've been in recruiting that time. What a horrible time that was. Like people taking jobs for less than half of what they made. So that empathy, you never forget. As recruiters, when you've gone through that phase, you tend to appreciate candidates even more. Not saying others don't, but I think I've just a lot of respect for talent in general. So that experience is not going to go away. You just got to keep making it better and better and better. So yeah, just a few things too.
Just terrific feedback. I make sure we are not remiss and that we have an opportunity to ask some questions. So hopefully you've thought of a few things to ask Madan and Mark. Yep. Thanks, Logan.
So this is great feedback. Love it. So two questions actually. One is, what tips do you have to ensure that your third-party recruiters that you work with nail the first initial screen, right? No, that's one question. The other is, what best practices or suggestions do you have in using third-party tools, whether it's a Glassdoor or a JobVite or whatever those other tools are, right, that are out there that or LinkedIn? So
I think there's a lot of tools you can use to source candidates, right? But if you're going to use a third-party agency, which I think your first question, you need to see them as a partner. If you use third-party agencies and you think that if hiring 10 of them, all contingent, is going to be the best course of action, over 20 years, that's not a good idea. What you're looking for is to partner with one firm and make them your partner. Bring them into your office. Introduce them to everybody. Help them understand your business, because they are not going to be able to sell your opportunity unless they truly understand your business and what you're looking for. Partner with somebody you trust, get a referral from somebody you've worked with before previously. There are some really good third-party people out there that can help you, but they have to understand your business. And if they don't, they're just shipping resumes over, hoping that something's going to stick. And that does not help you. It actually creates more work, it wastes your time, and you're not going to get the results you want. So I would find people, and you know what? Like you're interviewing candidates, interview third-party recruiters, right? Bring them in, interview them, get referrals, right? Check their references. These are all things you can do that will help you make a good decision. But I would say most importantly is find somebody you can partner with.
I've been a third-party recruiter once upon a time, so I can tell you definitely firsthand experience. I think a few of the things like Mark said, you're going to fall into this category of generalists or specialists. So if you're going to bring in a generalist to kind of look at a very specific niche job, you want to really understand what is their expertise in that market. You know, what is their network? You know, do they play in Bay Area, or is it someone sitting in North Carolina that's looking for folks in Bay Area? So understanding their network, reference is very important, specific to that role. When was the last time you filled that role? Who are the kind of companies you work with? I want to talk to them. I want to interview them. I want to screen them. I want to see what was their experience. What's your turnaround time? So those are the few things, you know, you want to almost gauge for how honest a lot of them are. You know, I'm nothing against third-party firms. It's just I think you'll see if they really have your interest, candidates' interest, or the best interest of the entire equation. There's a big difference. You almost don't want someone who only thinks about personal experience. You don't want almost someone who's only thinking about the company because it's going to make a bad candidate experience. You don't want someone who's only thinking about the candidate because they're probably thinking about making a quick buck, making the placement. They have to be smart and strategic enough to really understand the full equation, and it has to be a win-win-win for all three. That's when they're fully engaged into your search. Back to Mark's point, I would not get 10. I would get 1, I would get 2, and I would try to make sure I fully invest in them and give them all the tools. They're your partners, very well said. You know, I think a lot of times people mistake them to like the third-party firm. You know, they're making money, so it really doesn't matter. But you got to almost make them part of your recruiting team, if you will. That's when you'll get the most mileage out of them. And tools, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of tools. And like I said, I think, you know, a few things you'll want to keep in mind is monetization, right? So a lot of tools, I was talking to someone earlier today, and we were talking about fees for a tool that they were looking at selling. And he kind of told me it's 20%. And I'm like, why would I use a tool and then not use an agency for 20%? So things that you have to think about strategically as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, and what is that value they're adding? Are they really making your life easier? Or is that tool, again, doing the same thing that you're doing with 20 other tools? You know, so why are you different than somebody else? Why should I invest in you? And why would I pay 20% to you? Like, does not make sense to me. So it's okay to challenge them on that. You know, everything is negotiable, I'll tell you that. But it's about how much you can push and really understand whether it's adding value or it's not making recruiting's life easier, better, different, and just understanding those parameters.
We have one here. Yeah. I'm to the panel, but I guess my question centers around like emotional intelligence and how it relates to culture. I guess, how do you guys feel it fits in, and what are specific ways you guys test for emotional intelligence?
So give me a specific aspect of emotional intelligence and I can try to tailor the answer to that.
Empathy as a general concept.
So I think, and you're asking when a candidate comes in, how are we going about screening for that?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great question. So I think empathy, even if it's not one of your values, has got to be the one most resounding fact for every company and every person out here. You got to have empathy. So the idea is, there was this one manager I'll never forget. He used to do this very creative way. When he'd want to hire someone and they're almost at the initial or the final stages, he'd invite the person out for lunch. And in the lunch, he'd see how the person interacts with the waiter. Very creative, loved it. For me personally, through my time, I ask my front office or my front desk person always, how did he or she walk in? How did they treat you? So those are elements of empathy that you kind of look for in a person, and how they greet people, how they treat people, how they walk in. And when it comes to interview stage, you want to challenge them. Like, give me an example of a situation where you were in disagreement with the rest of the team in a project, and how did you go about handling that? So what you're looking for is, even if the person may not have been in that specific example, his thought process or her thought process, like how did they go about, how are they coming at it? So that's where that emotional intelligence or that empathy piece specifically will kick in. Like, do they really understand? It's back to the whole win-win-win. Are they thinking about this entire equation? Are they only thinking about like it's my way? That's when you start to nix out people on how you kind of screen for that. So we have specific areas where we have people screen candidates on those elements of empathy. And then we divvy it up, like someone else in some time will do it. In another case, an engineer would do it if it's an engineering person, or maybe one of our leaders would do it if it's an executive interview and they want to know how the person fits in the culture. So,
yeah, I think that's it's an important question, because that goes to some of the core values of your company, probably, right? Empathy is a big one, as an example. I think the examples you brought up are terrific. But it's really about trying to figure out what you want to accomplish with those questions, and then figure out what questions you want to ask. So I think that empathy is one of those things you can test for. But we have this thing. We have a Wednesday night dinner every Wednesday, no matter what. Dinner's catered in, and what we do when we're considering some candidates, we'll invite them to Wednesday night dinner and see how they interact with not just the people they interviewed with, but everybody in the company. And sometimes people bring their family, their friends, so you never know who they're going to run into and how they're going to interact with somebody. And so that's one of the things that we try to do as well.
Onto that, which is, are you talking to the people that they interact with in Wednesday night dinner and asking them for feedback, or is it more like a sell? And then generally, another question I have is that meeting, that final meeting, once the candidate's left, how do you conduct it? How do you make sure that biases aren't coming out? How do you structure thoughtful conversation versus flying opinions that are judgmental?
Great question. So it's both for your first question. We do see how they interact, and we also ask people that they interacted with. And about the recap that we call it, at the end, we have a scorecard as part of our process, and it's an opportunity for you to check boxes on the scorecard, but then also write, significant notes. And if you don't fill out your scorecard, you can't come to the recap, and you don't get a voice, because what happens is if you don't fill out your scorecards, you're not held accountable for your opinions. And a lot of times, if somebody likes a candidate and somebody else doesn't, by the time it gets to you, you can be swayed, right? And you can change your opinion, and that's not what we want. It's great to have a discussion and a debate, and you can tweak your answer maybe a little bit based upon what some people experienced. But at the end of the day, we want it to be authentic, and we want it to be yours. And so the only people to get the scorecards before a recap are the recruiter and the hiring manager. So the other interviewers don't see it until you get into the room. And then each person goes around and they talk about their experience with the candidate, what they thought, and everybody can ask them questions about their experience. And so that's how we use that. And as you spoke about biases earlier, we go through interview training and we try to remove the best we can unconscious biases, which is not the easiest thing to do sometimes. But we do try. So we're always trying to improve our interview process. We're always trying to improve our recaps and how we evaluate candidates. But those are some of the things we do. Yes.
Each other's scorecard?
No.
Only, okay. That's helpful.
Sure. Scorecards are all customized. So the hiring manager, based upon the criteria, the skill set, the experience, they get to create their own scorecards and whatever's important to them for candidates. And based upon that scorecard, you can give it anywhere from a rating of a 0 to a 5. And you send it in before the recap. And you also a place for, like I said, significant notes to talk about your experience with that candidate. And it's proven to be incredibly helpful for us.
We've got if they come on site, the hiring manager, the team members, and we in HR recruiting always let them know that the candidate's coming, and just be mindful. Like, you don't have to be a hawk watching him like or her, like, what is he or she doing? She talking to someone, not talk. So you just want to be mindful, general body language. Everyone partakes in that, right? So everyone's kind of looking out, and you can tell. It's really easy to tell. You can tell, how people genuinely interact, or they genuinely care, or they know they're in a simulated environment, so they're going to try to pretend like they care. But in addition to that, that interview training was uber important, where we had to make sure we gave everyone from, as sometimes it sounded like a lot of work, but it was kind of well spent. Give them right from basic level of all the way to high level of what it is. So if two people are walking out from an interview, and it's a panel interview, when you're walking out, I sit right outside, or my team members sit outside. So we literally tell them, hey, don't talk. Don't compare notes. Don't tell the other person out there what to look for and stuff. But it's kind of a joke. We try to start doing that more in the interview training. And give them all the tools, logging feedback within 24 hours. We have our ATS, applicant tracking system, make sure it is fully completed. We always tell hiring managers and leaders to go last when they're giving their feedback, because that's one of the easiest ways to get swayed. Right? So, I mean, if today Mark's the hiring manager and I'm one of the interviewers, and then Mark's like, oh my God, horrible candidate, then even if I love the guy, I'd be like, oh, yeah, Mark, really great observation, man. So we tell them to go last. And, it's very important, because people will get swayed. I don't care who you are, somewhere, form or the other, if your leader or your manager or the executive has given their first opinion, you'll probably have a different opinion. So even if you give the feedback, you're probably, actually, you know what, Mark, that was a great point. I didn't see that. Now I'm a no. So yeah, just basic things like that.
Well, I have a question. There are a lot of startup founders here who are looking to probably will make their first or second hire, which is very important. And usually in early stage startups, there is no established hiring process, no hiring manager, no 5 interviewers interviewing. So do you have any tips for startups, very, very young startups who are going to make that important hire, first or second hire? How would they go about this whole process?
In the beginning, before you start interviewing anybody, what do you really want to accomplish with that interview, right? Exactly what type of person are you looking for? Not just their skill set for the day-to-day job, right? But you're going to actually build a company, right? So do they have the same values you do? Do they have the same vision for the company that you do? Give it a tremendous amount of thought about what type of person you want to hire. There's a lot of people that have the same skill set, right? But everybody's different. So figure out what type of person you really want to hire as, another founder or the first handful of hires. They're incredibly important to the success of your company, right? And also remember, they're also going to be part of the face of your company, right? They're going to be talking to lots of different people. So you have to make sure that that's the type of person you want representing you and your company. So I would say take a tremendous amount of time to sit down, think about what you really want, and then figure out what kind of questions you want to ask so that you can get the results you want and get the type of person you want.
It's your first hire is going to be different from your 10th hire, and it's going to be different from your 50th hire. So that first hire is so is your 50th hire is going to be, but that first hire is going to be the make or break, because that's your partner. That's the person who you're going to spend a lot of countless nights staying awake trying to make sure you get this product out and get it successfully executed on, agree on the values, have a shared vision towards that, so making sure they understand equally jointly as to what you as a company are trying to represent and how they fit in that equation. That experience is now going to be a lot because now you're looking at someone who's possibly, not generalizing it, but with the first hires, with a lot of with a lot of startups, the compensation is off. They're used to making a little higher compensation. You might have a different adjustment. There's going to be, are they risk averse? So will they take on more equity for less comp? And are they going to bail? You want to understand that history in where they've been, where their thought process is, and how they're coming at it. So yeah, totally. I think you want to make sure that process is fully nailed down when you're trying to hire this person. And it's definitely going to be more about selling your vision and then them kind of feeling part of that vision in that sales pitch. So put on your sales hat for sure, because it's hard to convince someone to take a pay cut or a beating, or even if that's not the case, to be the first employee. It takes a special type of person to do that, screen for that and look for that in that individual.
So I think we have time for one more, if there's one more question. Oh.
Hi, thank you so much, Madan and Mark, for being here, and Greg for hosting us tonight. My question is, I just want to learn a little bit more about best practices for negotiating offers. And I'd like to know, what are things that you have liked and things that you have disliked that candidates have done when negotiating offers?
I think Mark covered this, and I talked about this. It's that first call that you make, which sets the tone for the candidate. It tells you a lot about how the person is. So think about a situation, right? So when I'm talking to you on the phone, I want to kind of understand what's your appetite for compensation, right? If you give me a certain number, I want to also probe further and be like, okay, so hypothetically, if I'm in a situation where we make you an offer, are you in a position to accept? So you want to kind of listen to what that person is saying, right? Are they shopping around? Like, oh, 2 to 3 days is plenty of time for me to accept. If you give me that much, I'll make up my mind. Or the person will be like, I need about 2 weeks. Because that's when you start to preempt that, like, okay, I know where this is going. So if we decide to hire this person, God knows where it's going to go. Is this person going to take this offer and shop? Is this person undecisive, which means, do I want this person? If you've told me specifically, if you can give me this, I will say yes. So what did I miss at the offer process? Like, if I made you an offer and I've given you everything and we've checked all the boxes. So those are the things that we try to keep in mind more so as in recruiting. Start with the end in mind, right? So the end is to person to walk through the door. First it used to be, yes, they accepted the offer, thank God. Now it's like, I hope he walks through the door. I'm exaggerating. But like, point is, like, market has changed. So, just try in that part to be very mindful and pick on those signs right well in advance, and keep that in mind as you continue through the interview process.
I think that you should be talking about compensation all the way through the interview process. And by the way, I like it when people try to negotiate, right? I think it's part of the fun. But I think you can handle it a number of different ways. If somebody doesn't want to tell you what they're making, that's okay. But tell me what you're expecting, right? And if they have a number that I think is a little out of line, I ask them, why do you think that number is appropriate, right? I want them to be able to tell me that, because if at the end of the day I have to try to sell this to somebody, like my comp committee, right? I need some ammunition to go back and fight for that candidate if I think it's the right one. So I never mind when somebody negotiates. I expect it. And so when they don't, I'm a little surprised, but I never mind when somebody negotiates. It's all about trying to set a proper expectation with them as you go through the process. And if you talk about comp the entire time and set the proper expectations, you shouldn't have any surprises.
Transparent with them through the whole process. If you can do it or you can't do from a compensation, don't waste anyone's time. Because sure as hell, you don't want your time wasted. Like, someone's making 200 and you can only afford 120. Well, you know what? Comp is a little off compared to what we were targeting, and here's where we are. Here's what stock, kind of just ballpark it, right? Your total comp. That's a thing where you kind of way to position your offer a little bit. Total comp is about this much. Are you okay with that? Titles that play a big part in a lot of people's careers from an offer process, right? So you want to keep certain things in mind. Certain folks at certain levels. If you're able, you have to make sure you can give someone a title if you can accommodate their career and it fits within your organization. So just keeping that in mind, okay, if senior marketing manager, you're a marketing manager, we can do that. That title is worth a certain amount of compensation. So be like creative. You can be a little creative, but transparency is very important through the entire process.
Okay. We know what really came through to me tonight was the passion these two guys have for this profession, right? I know it can be a bit overwhelming in talent and attraction and driving recruitment. There's no doubt about it. What I hope you come away with tonight is you've got some resources to talk to, and that's part of the benefit of this. In addition, there's some tools that'll be made available to you tonight. The question about, you're a startup and you're hiring your next person, there's actually some tools the guys have provided that can give you a little guidance there on the recruitment process, the offer process, those kinds of things. So some real tangible things you can take away. So I really want to thank Mark and Madan tonight for just a terrific event. Reminder that on August 9th, we have another event like this. It's the future of the customer experience. I think there might be a slide on that. If we can flip, I think I got that right. The future of the customer experience. Please don't miss that. And again, thank you very much for our panelists tonight, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, guys.